Kia ora everyone, and welcome to our next installment in the Need to Know Assurance series. It is an absolute privilege to have so many people joining us today. We still see a few attendees coming through, but it's probably time to get going because we do have quite a packed agenda. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Misha Peters, and I am the Director of Assurance here at the External Reporting Board. I'm really pleased to be joined by the full assurance team today, so you get to hear directly from our project managers on the projects that they've been working on, and they can give you an overview of why these changes are being developed or have been developed, and give you a snapshot of what they cover and where you can find more information. We've got quite a full agenda for today, and what we hope to cover in the next hour is listed on the slide here. So I'm going to start with a short introduction on the strategic priorities for the XRB in the space of assurance. And I hope that will set the scene for what will follow. And what will follow will be arranged in the following order. We'll remind you of the things that are applicable now or applicable soon. On these topics, we have covered these at previous sessions, so it's going to be a brief overview, but a reminder of where you can go and find more information. We're also going to cover a number of exposure drafts, which we are currently seeking your feedback on. And then finally, we'll end with a little bit of a sneak preview of some of the things that might be coming in due course. So without further ado, let me start with a bit of an overview of the XRB's strategic focus for assurance. Before I get into what's on this slide, one of our key areas of focus has been enhancing our engagement with you, our stakeholders. So thank you to all of you who have participated in a huge number of outreach events that we've been running over the past 6 months, from attending events with our international visitors, from participating in focus group discussions, virtual feedback events, or just webinars like today. We hope that you find these sessions valuable. We really value your input as to how you find them and what we can do to improve. So following today's webinar, we will be asking for your feedback by way of a survey, and we really do encourage you to provide us with feedback as to how we can improve. The second area of focus is, surprisingly, in setting assurance standards. And these are the three key areas which have been the focus over the past 12 months and will probably continue to be the focus for the next 12 months. So let me cover these briefly. In the first instance, we have been very focused on service performance information. This is information that is needed to be reported in both the public sector and the not-for-profit sectors. Over the past 12 months, we have revised the auditing standard on service performance information, and we've been working hard to develop a review standard on service performance information. Going forward over the next 12 months, it'll be less about setting the standards and more about monitoring how things are going. So we encourage you to tell us your stories about how you're finding the standards, the challenges that you face, what further guidance you would need. The next area of focus has been for the XRB on climate reporting. So with the advent of climate reporting requirements now mandatory and the imminent arrival of mandatory assurance over the greenhouse gas emission disclosures included within those climate reporting statements, we have in the past 12 months issued the standard for assurance over the greenhouse gas emission disclosures and issued some guidance to assist apply that standard. Again, over the next 12 months, we are really looking forward to seeing what this reporting is going to look like, as well as how the assurance regime steps up to support trust and confidence in this information. So again, as that imminent assurance draws nearer, we welcome all anecdotal stories, comments, things that that are going well, things that you're struggling with. What can we do to help? Please let us know. Thirdly, and definitely not last or least, is a focus on the audit of financial statements. The XRB exists to enhance trust and confidence, to ensure that investors have the information that they need and have trust and confidence in that information. In the past while, we commissioned some research and interviewed audit committee chairs. And it was really pleasing to see the results of that, which confirmed that audit committee chairs value audits hugely. They see trust and confidence as high in New Zealand reporting entities as a result of and enhanced by audits which are undertaken in accordance with our standards, but also value alignment with the international standards. So our core focus remains at the XRB to influence the development of these international auditing standards so that they are fit for purpose when they arrive in New Zealand. What you will have seen over the past 12 months is engagement on big topics like fraud and going concern, with a focus on the auditor's responsibilities. These standards are due to be issued within the next 12 months, and other areas of focus will include the impact of technology, as well as sort of looking at the risk response for auditors in terms of a revised and enhanced risk assessment. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour of where our strategic priorities lie, what we've been doing, and what we will be doing over the next 12 months. With that in mind, we'll give you an overview of all of the standards that we have been working on. So we're going to start with a very brief snapshot of the standards that are applicable now. So there's a lot of information on this slide. Again, these slides are going to be available after today's session on our website together with this recording. So you don't need to take copious notes or even read the details on this slide. This is just a snapshot, a reminder, hopefully nothing new, that these standards are applicable now. They relate to group audits. There's also a new domestic standard which aligns with our Australian counterparts for assurance over financial information prepared in connection with a capital raising. And the top one is a very minor, narrow scope amendment, but a really important one for auditors who are doing audit reports for entities that report using IFRS. So there's some minor tweaks to the audit report templates that are needed, and this is really to align with language coming out of the International Financial Reporting Standards. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a reminder of the standards that are applicable now. Next, we're going to get into the meaty topics that have been the areas of strategic focus. So I'm going to pass you over to Lisa, who has been leading the charge on all things service performance information related.
Great. Thank you, Misha. So as Misha just mentioned, last year, and those of you who attended previous Need to Knows will be aware that last year we revised the auditing standard for service performance information. So just let's take a moment to actually remind ourselves what service performance information is. So New Zealand public benefit entities are required to report what they have done during the reporting period towards achieving their broader aims and objectives. Now, this information will include things such as why the entity exists, what it aims to achieve, how it goes about this, and an appropriate mix of performance measures and/or descriptions. So essentially what it is the entity reporting or telling their story. So why did we revise the standard? Well, when we issued the standard in the extent auditing standard for service performance information, which was NZAS1, the Auditor General raised concerns with us around the suitability of it for the public sector. So we formed a working group with the Auditor General and other practitioners with an aim of developing a standard that could be easily adopted and applied in both the public and the not-for-profit sector. I'm pleased to report we met that objective, and the Auditor General has let us know that the NZAS1 revised standard will form the basis for auditing service performance information in the public sector. So who does this apply to? It applies to public benefit entities that have a statutory audit requirement of their financial statements. And if that entity is required to report service performance information under the External Reporting Board reporting standards, then that statement of service performance information will be included in that audit. So why are we talking about this today when we revised the standard and issued it last year? Well, we're now in the mandatory period, which is for periods beginning on or after 1 January 2024. So during the transition period, assurance practitioners would be able to use the Assurance Standard for Non-Financial Information, or extant NZAS1. But going forward, when we're in the mandatory period, those two standards will not be applicable and for auditing service performance information, and the audit engagement will be needed to be conducted under NZAS1 revised. So if you haven't done so already, now is the time to get ready. To help with this transition, you'll see on our website, which is under the page where the standard sits, so NZAS1 revised page. If you scroll down the bottom, you'll find a frequently asked question document, and it'll help you through these transition requirements just to give you a bit more information if you require it. Okay, so when we revised NZAS1, we were aware that there were some practitioners that had already chosen to use NZAS1, the extant standard. So we wanted to develop this flowchart to help them with that transition from NZAS1 to NZAS1 revised. We've got a copy of that flowchart here, and you'll see that it steps the auditor through the various steps of doing an engagement of service performance information. Down the right-hand side there, you'll see in the sort of goldy colour, that's where materiality, for example, is needed to be considered. And it steps you through the various steps. So you step one, for example, of assessing whether information is appropriate and meaningful. So to assist with the transition from NZAS1 to NZAS1 revised, we've added these little pop-up boxes that are little blue speech marks in the top right-hand corner of the document. Realising today that this will be hard for you to see, I've tried to draw what that looks like more enlarged. So you need to use your imagination here, because I was recommended by my art teacher not to continue with art. But on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see that we've got a little speech bubble, and then you click on that, and then it pops up with another box. And that is actually giving you the key differences between NZAS1 and NZAS1 revised. So although this was adapted, although we did this as a flowchart to help people with that revision, where this flowchart comes from is at the back of the NZAS1 revised standard. So I've actually been told, although it was to help with that transition, it's actually a really useful guide for people who are perhaps still using 3000, the assurance standard for non-financial information, to work their way through the steps of auditing service performance information. You'll be able to find this flowchart again on our website under the NZAS1 revised page. When these slides go up on our website, there will be a link to this page for you, so you'll be able to find that. So now I'll pass you over to Nimish. Thank you.
I am going to talk to you about standards which will be applicable throughout the rest of 2024. And as Misha already mentioned, the first big change is greenhouse gas assurance. So mandatory GHG assurance is upon us, and we released our GHG assurance standard in August 2023, and it applies from 27th of October this year. This is in response to the changing demand from investors for high quality information beyond just financial information, and GHG assurance is an important part of enhancing the trust and confidence in that type of information. As a brief reminder, the GHG assurance standard has been specifically designed as a temporary standard. We have designed this to be deliberately open and to allow for assurance practitioners who have come from a wide range of backgrounds and have used a number of different internationally recognized standards, which may not have been issued by the XRB. We want practitioners to be able to learn from each other and to build resources and capacity, particularly in the infancy of such a regime. And the other big factor is, of course, the changing landscape of sustainability and GHG reporting and assurance and relevant legislation throughout the world. Different standards are being developed, but seemingly on a daily basis. And as that changing landscape changes, this standard has been designed to be temporary and to navigate the short term until that landscape becomes clearer. and a permanent solution is determined. Along with our standard, we also published a basis for conclusions, and this is a really useful document to help explain the rationale as for some of the requirements which are included in the standard. If you are not familiar with the basis for conclusions, it's worth having a read, as it will help you appreciate and understand why the requirements have been designed as they are and why you're being asked to do certain things as part of GHG assurance. This is a fundamental change for the assurance profession, and we absolutely recognise that. There are a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving factors, so we completely understand that there will be a number of questions around how to do this work. And that brings me on to the next slide around the guidance that we have introduced and prepared to help practitioners as they perform this work. So in November 2023, we issued 3 pieces of guidance. The first one being an independence guide, and this helps practitioners understand and apply the fundamental principle of independence when considering GHG assurance work. There is a very high bar of independence within the GHG assurance standard, and that high bar needs to be recognised. It is fundamental that you are independent of the entity when you're performing GHG assurance services, as your assurance report may not have much value if you are not independent. So this guide helps understand and embed those fundamental principles of independence to practical situations and solutions, and it may help you as you consider your own unique circumstances when performing this work. The second guidance piece we introduced was a transitional provision guide, and again, to be very open and to allow for inclusivity in this regime, we have included a transitional provision within the standard which allows for assurance practitioners who may have been performing other services in the past to not be disqualified or removed from this regime. So if you have been performing non-assurance services and you wish to start performing assurance services, it's worth reading that transitional provision guide, as that will help you determine how to transition into assurance services. And the last guidance piece we introduced last year was illustrative assurance reports. As mentioned before, the underlying GHG assurance standard allows for multiple different internationally recognized technical standards around GHG assurance. And those standards have different requirements and they result in different looking assurance reports. It's absolutely okay to have variability and differences in your GHG assurance report compared to your neighbours. And these illustrative assurance reports outlines a way that you may want to structure and present your assurance report in line with the different underlying technical GHG standards. But we do want to encourage variability where it's appropriate. It is okay if your assurance report looks different. So these illustrative templates will hopefully help present one way and one view of how it could look, but feel free to take the bits that work for you and to ignore the rest. And what we also introduced earlier this year was a FAQ document, questions and answers around a number of questions that the assurance team has been getting around GHG assurance. Again, we appreciate there will likely be a number of questions from varying practitioners out there in a varying number of different circumstances. So we have collated these together where we believe they would impact multiple different practitioners, and we have published these in February 2024. It's worth being familiar with this document as it does contain a number of different areas and a number of different dimensions of GHG assurance. For example, we answer who can perform GHG assurance, the answer to that being any competent and independent assurance practitioner. It does not need to be a financial statement auditor, it can be someone else. We answer questions around other information and what exactly is other information in the context of a GHG assurance engagement. The answer to that is it very much depends upon how the climate reporting entity structures their documents and how they present their GHG information in climate statements. And we answer questions around quality reviewers and exactly who can be a quality reviewer on a GHG assurance engagement. Again, the answer to that being anyone who's competent and independent enough to perform the role of a quality reviewer and has the authority and respect to be able to challenge an engagement leader. This questions and answers document will be frequently updated as we get more and more questions and as we believe they'll be useful to practitioners. So please continue to check the website as updated versions get released in case it does help in terms of your thinking and decision making. And please continue to ask us questions. Again, we completely understand this is a step change for the profession. It feels different. People may be slightly nervous. We would encourage everyone to embrace this as a learning opportunity. This is the evolution of the assurance profession, and we absolutely encourage questions and communication and learning so that this profession and this step change continues to be effective. The next area that impacts 2024 that I want to just talk through is public interest entity revisions. And on the next slide, I just want to go back to an amendment that was made in November 2022 to the Professional and Ethical Standard 1 in relation to public interest entities. So this amendment applies from 15th of December 2024 and impacts on public interest entity audits. So the concept of a public interest entity is quite interesting. It is underpinned by the belief or the concept that there is greater public expectations and interest in the financial condition and therefore the financial statements of certain entities which significantly impact New Zealand. Audit, of course, is a critical function in improving the trust and confidence in the financial statements of those entities. So the concept of a public interest entity was developed to enhance the confidence in those audits through greater requirements and greater expectations on the auditor's behaviour. And that generally manifests itself through enhanced independence requirements. There may be situations where certain safeguards or certain actions may be appropriate for particular entities, but would not be sufficient and appropriate for a public interest entity because of the greater expectations that the public has in that particular entity. So the definition and the concept of a public interest entity is designed to put a spotlight on significant entities to New Zealand and create greater expectations on those auditors. And a reminder that the New Zealand PI definition is outlined in the diagram on that slide and includes Tier 1 entities who are not eligible to report under another reporting tier, FMC reporting entities with higher levels of public accountability, which includes all deposit takers and insurers, large public sector entities, and large charities. So this definition has not changed. A public interest entity in New Zealand has been relatively stable, but this amending standard in November 2022 created a requirement for an auditor to disclose when the enhanced independence requirements relating to PIs had been applied on an audit. And that takes me to the next slide, where in November 2023, we released an amending standard to the auditing standards, which effectively operationalizes that requirement. So this amending standard released last year creates changes to the audit report auditing standard and the communication to governance auditing standard to outline how an auditor can publicly declare that they have complied with the enhanced requirements related to public interest entities. You can see from the slide there, the actual wording changes within the assurance report is very, very minor. There are not a lot of big added words or struck out words, but it is an important change to ensure that auditors communicate to users of the auditor's report that they have met those enhanced requirements. A similar change is also done to the communication to those charged with governance auditing standard, where the requirement to disclose this enhanced compliance is also included within that standard. So while this is a very minor change, it is quite important that you as auditors who meet these public interest entity expectations are positively confirming to their stakeholders that they have complied with those enhanced requirements. And just to recap on public interest entities, auditing PIEs is different. There's no way to get around that. It is a different nature of the work and the expectations. And if you are auditing public interest entities, or you are looking to audit public interest entities, it's worth being familiar with these different requirements, particularly the ones that take effect from this year, as it is part of meeting those higher expectations in the space of public interest entities. So that is a brief canter through the remaining standard changes in 2024. I will pass you over to Sharon, who will talk through some of our open consultations.
Thanks, Nimish, and good afternoon, everyone. So it's my pleasure here today to start the discussion about what is currently open for comment. And first up, we are continuing along that public interest entity theme. In New Zealand, we are consulting on some proposed public interest entity amendments to the auditing standards. Now, I'm just going to back up a little bit here and explain first what's been going on internationally. So the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board has proposed to adopt into their auditing standards the definition of public interest entity from the International Code of Ethics. And it is planning on expanding the application of the differential requirements in the auditing standards to apply to public interest entities. Consultations on the international exposure draft closed earlier this week. At the XRB, we have submitted on that consultation and we have expressed our support for the proposals. We think it makes sense that the same term is defined in the same way and that the strictest auditing and independence requirements apply to audits of public interest entities. So how does this impact us here in New Zealand, given our broader definition of PIE? We currently have out for consultation our domestic exposure draft, and we are consulting on proposed changes to the auditing standards. There are two parts to the consultation. One is to adopt the definition of public interest entity from our Code of Ethics into the auditing standards. So that definition, as Nimish just explained, Tier 1 reporting entities. We are also expanding or looking at expanding the application of the differential requirements in the auditing standards to public interest entities. Adopting the same definition for public interest entities as the code is about consistency of key terms between the various standards, and it keeps things simple. So as Nimish explained, public interest entities in New Zealand are Tier 1 reporting entities. The strictest reporting requirements apply to Tier 1 reporting entities. Likewise, the strictest independence requirements and the strictest auditing requirements should also apply to the audit engagements for those entities. For public interest entities, stakeholders have heightened expectations about the performance of the audit, and the differential requirements support enhancing trust and confidence. Now let's take a quick look at what those differential requirements are. So currently, differential requirements apply to FMC reporting entities considered to have a higher level of public accountabilities. And they mainly relate to mandatory engagement quality reviews, reporting of key audit matters, and certain other matters that are required for FMC reporting entities to be communicated to those charged with governance. Under the proposals, these differential requirements would apply to audits of all Tier 1 reporting entities. So that includes audits of large public sector entities and large charities. And from what we can gather, there's about an extra 450 audit engagements that would be captured. And we know that a number of those engagements, particularly those large charities, are performed by auditors in the mid-tier firms. So, how can you help us? If you are an auditor of a public interest entity, or if you have a role as a preparer, a user, or from governance of those public interest entities who will be captured under the proposed expansion of the differential requirements, we would really like to hear from you. We want to hear how these proposals will impact you. We are planning on hosting a focus group discussion to explore the impact of these proposals, and I would encourage you, please, to get in touch if you would like to be involved in that. assurance@xrb.govt.nz. That information will be provided at the end of, on the last slide. So we are also planning on exploring the proposals further in our feedback forum that will be held on the 8th of May. And you can find out more information about this consultation on our website. The consultation on the public interest entity amendments closes on June 4th. So I'll now move on to talk about one of the international consultations. And as Misha mentioned earlier in her comments, the International Board is proposing revisions to the auditing standard dealing with the auditor's responsibility for fraud in the audit of financial statements. So I'm going to take a look at why the auditing standard is changing and then look at some of the more significant changes. So why does the auditing standard need to change? There are three main reasons that come to mind: the expectation gap, evolving stakeholder demands, and global corporate failures. The expectation gap is the difference between what the user expects and what the audit delivers. Evolving stakeholder demands. There have been a number of changes to jurisdictional standards dealing with fraud, the auditing of fraud, and the International Board is trying to look to keep pace with those changes. And then we've had some fairly significant global corporate failures in recent years, and the inevitable question comes up: where was the auditor? So the International Board is doing what it can. It's using the tools it has available to try to clarify the auditor's role, to reduce that expectation gap, to modify the standard to keep pace with other developments around the world, and to respond to its critics. So while management and governance have the primary responsibility for preventing and detecting fraud, the auditor has a key role to play. So the role of the auditor is of a watchdog rather than a bloodhound. So what changes can you expect to see in the fraud exposure draft? The International Board is looking for a change in auditor behaviour. It's upping the game on how the auditor thinks about fraud in the financial statement audit. So first of all, it's clarifying the auditor's responsibilities. Now, the auditor's responsibility is to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. That responsibility has not changed. What the exposure draft does is it separates out the auditor's responsibilities from the inherent limitations of an audit. The exposure draft recognises that there are inherent limitations, but those inherent limitations do not absolve the auditor from their responsibility, and the exposure draft is clear. The auditor has a responsibility to plan and perform the engagement to identify material misstatement due to fraud. Now, how does it do that? Key to the revisions is the focus on professional skepticism. That also is not a new concept, but is very important in the auditor's consideration of fraud. It's very important that the auditor maintains their professional skepticism. And the exposure draft provides examples of the application of professional skepticism in various circumstances. The exposure draft strengthens the focus on the auditor's risk assessment. So consideration of fraud is integral to the auditor's risk assessment. It should be something that's done as part of the risk assessment and is not as an afterthought after the auditor's done their risk assessment. So for each of the requirements in the risk assessment standard, the exposure draft applies a fraud lens. It's making the auditor think more about how fraud might occur. And we're not just talking about theft or misappropriation of assets. Fraud also includes fraudulent financial reporting. So how might the organisation intentionally misstate its financial statements to deceive the users? And it includes omissions of amounts or disclosures in the financial statements as well. So when fraud is identified or suspected, the exposure draft requires a robust response. There are specific requirements on the engagement partner, including that the engagement partner has a responsibility to determine the response for the engagement. So there are specific requirements, things that the audit partner needs to do to respond. And then finally, in the auditor's report, the auditor's responsibility for fraud has been clarified. And for listed entities in the international world or in New Zealand, for FMC reporting entities with higher levels of public accountability, there is a new transparency requirement. So the exposure draft introduces a key audit matter related to fraud. And a key audit matter related to fraud are those matters that required significant auditor attention. It is expected that there will often, and you should read that as almost always, be matters related to fraud that are to be communicated. Key audit matters need to be specific to the entity circumstances, so avoiding that boilerplate language and avoiding standardization. And then, of course, supporting all that is the need for ongoing communication with management, those charged with governance, and enhanced audit documentation requirements. So I'll move on now to our consultation timeline. We have hosted our feedback forum that was held in March, and I'm sure there are a number of people on this call who attended that forum, so thank you for attending. Our consultation does remain open until May 15, and any comments that we receive will be used to inform our submission to the International Board, which is due in early June. So I encourage you to please share your views with us. Now I will pass over to Anna, who will take you through some proposed changes to the Code of Ethics.
During the next 5 minutes, we will have a look at proposal issued recently by the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants. The ISPA has drafted and is consulting on a set of new ethics and independence standards for sustainability reporting and sustainability assurance. You will be able to access it through the links on the slide. The proposal is lengthy and quite detailed, so to help you to navigate through the requirements, the XRB developed a summary. It has been posted to our website, and you will be also able to access it through the second link from this slide. Probably the first question that we should answer is why ethical and independent sustainability standards are being developed. There have been a rise in public demand for sustainability information. The amount of sustainability information reported by entities is increasing. As there is more public interest in such information, the stakeholders are looking to place trust and confidence on the reported information. How these proposals are relevant to us in New Zealand? The ISPA proposes that assurance practitioners need to follow the requirements if they provide assurance over sustainability information prepared in accordance with general purpose framework, or that information is publicly disclosed for decision making or is required by law and regulations. In New Zealand, this would probably mean that assuring greenhouse gas disclosures in climate statements issued by climate reporting entities would fall in the scope if the XRB would adopt the proposal. So we are currently exploring if the proposals are fit for purpose for New Zealand. How the proposed requirements for sustainability assurance look. Let's have a look on the diagram. The exposure draft has been developed on the premise that the same high bar of ethical and independence requirements should be applied to sustainability information as it is currently required from auditors of financial statements. The proposals are gathered in a new standalone Part 5. The structure of Part 5 mirrors the structure of the whole Code of Ethics, and it is using the building blocks concept, which means that fundamental principles and a conceptual framework underpin all the requirements. On top of this are layered ethical requirements for providing any services to assurance sustainability assurance clients. And then on top of this are independence requirements that will be applicable to certain type engagements. Those engagements who are considered to have the same public interest as financial statement audits. And the ISPA has this requirements defined in the proposal. So the diagram on the slide might assist you in navigating through Part 5. New sections not included in the current Code of Ethics are highlighted in bold frame. For example, a new section, some new sections are included in relation to value chain. Value chain is more and more commonly used concept in the sustainability information because stakeholders are interested not only on the entities' sustainability performance, but also on sustainability of entities, suppliers, and customers. As we are assessing how the proposed ethics and independence is fit for New Zealand, we are interested in your thoughts. If you would like to share your feedback on this sustainability, ethical, and independence requirements, let us know by 15th of April, and it will help us to shape our New Zealand submission to the ISPA. So now I will pass to Nimash.
Thanks, Anna. And the last exposure draft we want to talk through today is ISPA's second exposure draft around using the work of an external expert. So the genesis of this exposure draft was to respond to concerns around the growing trend of external experts being used in audits and assurance engagements and questions on their independence. It was a bit unusual that the graduate auditor in an engagement team was subject to quite strict independence requirements, but an external expert who may be making some quite significant judgments which an engagement partner is relying on was not subject to any specific independence requirements. So this exposure draft has responded to that by creating additional requirements on the assurance practitioner or the auditor to evaluate the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of any external expert that they wish to use. So the exposure draft creates new definitions and revises some existing definitions designed to make those definitions more clearer and more broader across a wide range of experts. And it effectively creates an ethical framework that any assurance practitioner can follow to evaluate the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of an external expert. That primarily represents itself through the assurance practitioner requiring specific information to be obtained from the external expert and going through an evaluation process, considering threats to fundamental principles and implementing safeguards and responding to those threats before that assurance practitioner is then able to engage the expert for their specific work. And it's really important to recognise that these changes apply equally to financial auditors doing financial statement audits and sustainability assurance practitioners who are doing sustainability assurance work. So these are changes that are impacting on the use of all external experts, irrespective of the type and exactly which assurance engagement they're working on. So again, these are quite big changes, and we do welcome your feedback on it. If there's any comments you want to make, please submit them to us by 15th of April, and we will use that feedback to inform our submission to IESBA by the end of the month. Now I will pass you back on to Lisa, who will talk through some upcoming standards.
Thanks, Mish. Yes, so as Misha said at the start of the presentation, the other area of work that we've been doing on service performance information is the review of service performance information. So why have we been doing this? Well, in New Zealand, there's a statutory requirement for some entities to have an audit or a review of their performance report. So the performance report includes both financial and service performance information. But in New Zealand at the moment, we only have a review standard for financial information and no specific review standard for service performance information. So assurance practitioners at the moment are conducting these engagements using a combination of the assurance standard for non-financial information and guidance that we've previously issued for reviewing service performance information. So you'll notice then that the requirements when having to review it is actually split between the review standards and the assurance standards. So what we have been working on is developing a review standard that is specific for service performance information, and it will work concurrently with the existing review standard for financial information. Once this is mandatory, then 3000 will no longer be applicable for when reviewing service performance information. So we're starting consultation on this proposed standard later this month, and you'll notice through one of our alerts, our assurance alerts that get emailed out to you when we put this on the website. But like I say, keep an eye out for it. We're looking to put it up later this month. It'll be a 90-day consultation period, and during that period, I'll be holding a focus group to get your feedback on the proposed standards and discussing review engagements of service performance information. So hopefully I see a number of you there. I look forward to meeting you in person. Oh, sorry, it'll be virtual. I look forward to meeting you virtually. So now I'll pass you over to Bruce, who's going to talk about less complex entities. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. So in December 2023, the IAASB published the ISA for Less Complex Entities, or ISIF LCE. This is a standalone optional auditing standard for the audit of financial statements of less complex entities. The standard contains all requirements necessary to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. The standard right-sizes the audit relative to the size and structure of the entity. The standard is based on the core principles and requirements of the full ISAs, but tailored for less complex entities. It provides the same level of assurance as an audit performed under the ISAs, that is, reasonable assurance. The ISA for LCE does not reduce the quality of the audit or necessarily mean less work. It is a different type of audit, not a lesser audit. It helps auditors focus on aspects of the audit that are relevant for less complex entities. It's about doing the right work, including the right amount of work in the right areas, and having the proportionate requirements to drive that work. So here at the XRB, we're acknowledging that there is support for this standard in New Zealand, and we're considering how and if to adopt the standard here. The standard would be suitable for New Zealand's economy given the high number of less complex entities. So what are the next steps? Well, we'll consider who it will apply to. There's general consensus that the standard will not be able to be used for audits of Tier 1 reporting entities, those public interest entities, and those entities that do not have the characteristics of a less complex entity. And those characteristics are detailed further in the standard. We're currently drafting requirements within the ISA for LCE to enable the audit of service performance information when the standard is used. And all going well, we'll issue an exposure draft and consultation document later in the year, so watch this space. Now let's wrap up. And over to the next slide, another slide. Now let's look at a few features on our website that you may not be aware of. Firstly is what we call the History of Approvals page, and this contains a useful list of those recently issued assurance and ethical standards, which Misha talked about right at the start of this webinar. Also talks about the application date and the links to each standard. Also on this page, we publish a summary of standards that we've issued but are not yet applicable. Another page on our website is what we call the Audit and Assurance Hub. And you can get to this by clicking on that button, the gold Audit and Assurance button on the XRB's homepage. This page has recently been refreshed and contains useful information for audit and assurance practitioners, such as the history of approvals, our research, and of course links to the standards. Also on this page is a link to the portal where you can submit your modified audit reports. And a reminder that modified audit reports for companies, FMC reporting entities, and now those incorporated societies should be filed with the XRB via this page. Thanks. Now I'll hand over to Karen.
Thank you everyone for joining us today and for listening to our brief tour through the upcoming audit and assurance standards. And we've got a bit of time now for questions. So Misha.
Yes, so I already see a question's been dropped in the Q&A. It's a great one. The question that's been asked is sort of takes us back through to when Nimesh was talking about our temporary standard over greenhouse gas. The question asked was, is there any assurance guidance over climate-related disclosures outside of the GHG emissions? Example, limited or reasonable assurance over the entity's full climate statement. This is a great question. It's a very topical question. At the moment, if you're looking for the standard that the XRB's issued, the standard that Lisa was talking about, the ISAE 3000, is a very high level umbrella standard that applies to non-financial reporting. But there are a lot of international standards currently being drafted in this space. And I believe, Karen, at our last Need to Know, we dealt with the developing proposals on what we talk about, ED ISA 5000, which is the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board's proposals related to sustainability information. There is also a standard on under construction by the ISO in this space. There is a guidance document which is available on our website, which relates to, at the time, the term that was used was EER and other sustainability information. So those links we can get to you when we send the slides out. We'll get you links to where we can find those other documents. Karen, anything else you'd add on that question related to guidance on the broader climate statements?
Yeah, I think that covers everything that we know that's out there.
So yeah, we are very keen to see. Obviously, there's a legal requirement under the Act for the micro assurance engagement. We understand that people might be voluntarily assuring more. So yeah, we're just very mindful that we need to keep a watching brief on who's doing what and what assurance is actually required by the marketplace. And that will inform our next steps. Nimesh, you might want to make any other comments on this one?
No, I would only just reference there's some extended external reporting EER guidance, which the ETSAB has issued, which may be useful in just considering assurance in this sort of space.
The next question that's been dropped in the Q&A is, with the IAASB issuing guidance on how to refer to the standard within the audit report, IFRS accounting standards, is there any update on when the New Zealand standard setter will issue guidance? I am just trying to read this question to make sure I understand it. I know we have issued an amending standard with reference to changes to the audit report because of changes in the IFRS accounting standards, but I'm not entirely sure if that's the question that's being asked here. Bruce, do you have any insights into this question, or do you think that that amending standard is the one that this might be linked to? If it's not, whoever's asked the question, please contact us afterwards. Yeah, I hope I've answered the question. If I haven't, please give us a call afterwards. I'd love to understand this question better. And then another comment that's been added here is, please can you point out where the SSP FAQ document is, as we are having trouble finding this. So when you get the slides posted on the website, there was actually going to be a sort of scanning code that people with technological brains much brighter than mine have added to the slides. So you'll very easily be able to scan the code and it will take you directly there. So hopefully do have a look out and download these slides from our website, and links to all of the standards, guidance, any other information will take you directly to the page or the document that has been published. Don't see any other questions coming through.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'd just like to give a little reminder about our survey, which will be emailed out to you following this presentation. So hopefully you can find a bit of time just to fill that out and give us some feedback, so we can make sure that we are addressing things that people would like to have addressed for the next time. And yeah, thank you, and mā te wā.